The president's budget is out now, a $3 trillion budget. I think that's a record, $3 trillion budget, with a huge amount of money for military expenses and a huge amount of money specifically for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. What's happening here is that our country's infrastructure is crumbling, and yet we're building the infrastructure in Iraq. While our bridges are falling down, we're building bridges in Iraq. While our schools are crumbling in America and doing poorly, we're building new schools in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're nation building in two nations, and yet we're neglecting our own country here. And the president is saying that entitlement spending is going to have to come down. You and I are going to have to tighten our belts, but the spending for the folks in Iraq and Afghanistan continues. And I wonder if that's not misguided in some fashion, and maybe we should stop being the policeman to the world. What do you think about that? It's very, very expensive proposition to be the world's policeman. Very expensive. Enormously expensive. Do you think that there's a point in time when we need to say, enough's enough, we need to spend some money at home, we need to cut our budget deficits? With this $3 trillion in budget, that's going to mean $3 trillion worth of spending means that the real budget deficit, not the phony one that they tell you, but the real budget deficit, which is measured by the amount the national debt increases, is probably going to be somewhere, I think, around $800 billion. I mean, that's a massive, massive addition to the U.S. government debt. That's going to bring us very, very close to the $10 trillion level. I think we're at $9.3 trillion or over $9.3 trillion right now. That's going to take us to almost the $10 trillion level. Do you believe that there's a point in time at which we can't sustain that anymore? We can't get the Chinese and the Middle Easterners to loan us enough money to sustain that kind of debt. At some point, what do you think? We've got the banks in trouble. We've got all of these sovereign wealth funds coming in here, buying our banks and so forth. Do you think that that's likely to lead to problems down the road? What do you think? 1-800-TAP-GOLD. To me, it's I don't mind them doing business in the United States. I don't mind them owning companies in the United States. But when they're taking over our principal financial institutions, when they're taking over organizations that have enormous lobbying clout, enormous political influence, that contribute enormous amounts of money to the politicians, that kind of makes me a little bit nervous. Does it make you nervous to have foreigners controlling all of that political power in our country? 1-800-TAP-GOLD, TAPGOLD. Norm in Ohio, hello.
I give you a lot of credit for what you do every day on the airways. I've been listening to you for quite a while.
Thank you. That's very nice of you.
Well, I'm going to be your nemesis now because what we're experiencing, Joe, is what I call casino capitalism. They got this game so rigged. And, I got to be honest with you, I was taking a little bit of a nap when you talked about Bush's budget, okay? The $3 trillion that they print out of thin air. No nation ever lasted or existed creating fiat money. The joke's on the American. No, the joke's on the American people.
Unfortunately, though, it's not a joke.
Myself included, we've read all the books like you have in the caller from California. We know what the problem is. We got the blueprint. But you know what's missing? The intestinal fortitude to go to Washington, D.C., drag these bumps out. All of them.
Haven't I said over and over again that nothing will change until the people are willing to take up the picket lines, the protest lines in Washington, D.C.?
We're cowards. No, cowards, Joe. You could take this to the bank. We're a nation of cowards because we get manipulated by the money henchmen, okay, the bond houses, the brokerage houses on Wall Street. And Joe, you're going to disagree with me. They can even manipulate the price of gold.
Oh, I don't disagree with you at all, and I think that there has been a considerable amount of that going on. But those folks there on Wall Street have taken a different tack. They're trying to protect themselves too because they realize that the point of no return is, if it hasn't been reached, it's very near. So they're protecting themselves with gold, but they're not telling the public to do that. They're not telling the people to do that. And what do? You see a day like today where they use a technical resistance point, drive the price of gold way down, and scare out some of the late comers or the weak holders who don't really understand what's going on. And they buy up big positions. The market rallies right back. I mean, it's just, it's just a game. That's why I tell people you got to have confidence in this market. It's going to last a long time. We have the major banks and brokerage firms telling their richest clients and their institutional clients that they think gold's going to $1,000 this year, and many of them are talking about $2,000, $3,000 an ounce. So, you can't be suckered. The public too often is suckered. The public too often gets misinformation. And I appreciate your passion with that, Norm. If we could only get somebody with a bigger voice than you and I have to exhibit that same passion and to be as much of a patriot to our country. We see Ron Paul doing it, but he always was simply a voice in the wilderness. But actually, he may win Alaska, is what it's looking like, and he has scored better than many of the front runners that have scored in some of these primaries so far. So maybe the word is getting out. The young people are starting to understand what he's saying. That's for sure. His support comes primarily from college students, really, people who understand what's going on and they want to do something about the future, as opposed to some of the folks my age who sit around and just say, "Oh well, it's their problem. Don't bother me." Hang on for a free coin. The number to call 1-800-TAP-GOLD, TAPGOLD. William in Kentucky, Maryland in Washington. Hello.
Hello. So I just wanted to thank you. And just a few minutes ago, I also heard you mention his name for mentioning Ron Paul on your radio show. You're the only person I've ever heard doing that for 2 weeks on their own. And the few people that are asked a question about him, they just respond with, on that one issue, Paul's okay, and then they go right off to something else. They don't. But I thank you, because I think if you were running, I'd vote for you for president.
They'd probably shoot me. They probably wouldn't let me run.
Well, I'm afraid they might shoot Ron Paul. I mean, he's got all the good ideas, and we do need to get back. I'm not for leaving Iraq into a bloodbath. Oh, my goodness, we're going to have a bloodbath here in the United States if we don't get ourselves under control.
Yeah, we're having a financial bloodbath right now. We've got banks on the verge of collapsing. The latest estimates coming out on the losses that these banks are ultimately going to take on these mortgage derivatives and other kinds of derivatives runs between $600 billion and $800 billion. Already they've written off $200 billion, and they've just barely scratched the surface. This thing is a mess. And you know what? Those people in Washington knew. They knew this was going on.
Oh, I'm sure they did.
Well, Marilyn, you've probably listened to me for a long time, haven't you?
Yes.
Well, over the past 4 or 5 years, I've talked about it extensively. When there was a bill pending to regulate the banks on these over-the-counter derivatives, I talked about it a lot. I said, hey, the very fact that they're fighting it so hard means they have something to hide. And it's risky. Everybody knew it was risky, super high-risk things they were doing, but they didn't care because they were all making money off of it. And those Wall Street people, not only were the Wall Street people making money off of it, but the politicians were getting campaign contributions from them, for keeping their mouths shut and not regulating them.
Oh, gosh, we got to get rid of some of those people in Congress. I mean, even some of the ones that you think should be okay turn out not to be.
I think the most important issues facing our country right now are economic.
Absolutely.
And it's as Warren Buffett said, these financial derivatives that they've come up with are weapons of mass destruction. And they pose a vastly greater risk to our country than any terrorist could possibly pose, because this economic problem has if it plays out in a worst case scenario, and if we do not rectify the unfunded liabilities, this country is going to go through a period of cataclysm the likes of we have never seen before.
Oh, absolutely. Ron Paul says to bring back the military, and I don't know what other choice we have. We've got to save money somehow.
Well, we've got to save money somewhere, somehow. And we need to rebuild our country, and we need to create good jobs in America again. We can't take people out of a good manufacturing job and put them to work for the government, increasing regulations, or put them to work in a service industry where they're, making hamburgers or taking tickets in a movie theater.
Terrible.
We need to have good manufacturing jobs again, and we could have it. We could do it if we weren't spending our money everywhere else.
That's right. And the only guy that's saying that is Ron Paul.
That's right.
I tell you, I'm so happy to hear what you said about Alaska.
Yeah, I read in the paper today that he's ahead in Alaska. He may actually win Alaska, and that'll turn some heads, I think. Even though Alaska is considered small, but if you look at the way he's run, he has gotten more votes than a whole lot of the other candidates. Now, this isn't a